President Trump appearing to soften on his demand for a wall, holding his first meeting with congressional Democrats, since saying he would, quote, take the mantle for a government shutdown. This was about 3 weeks ago. We've been going through all this. Trump has invited the top 8 congressional leaders from both parties to the White House for a briefing on the border wall today, this afternoon. It will be the first significant conversation he has had with Democrats since the partial shutdown began 12 days ago. This hours after Trump tweeted, quote, border security and the wall thing. And that would be thing in quotation marks. And shutdown is not where Nancy Pelosi wanted to start her tenure as Speaker. Let's make a deal? To which Speaker-designate Nancy Pelosi replied, Donald Trump has given Democrats a great opportunity to show how we will govern responsibly and quickly pass our plan to end the irresponsible Trump shutdown. Just the first sign of things to come in our new Democratic majority committed to working for the people. And most of the people, Rick Tyler, don't want a wall. So how does Trump get out of this box, and do Republicans stay in the box with Trump?
Well, Trump will declare this week that he asked the Army Corps of Engineers to erect a force field, and the reason you'll know it's true is because he tweeted about it. But all kidding aside, that's about his only option. Nancy Pelosi is going to go to the House. She's going to pass a continuing resolution to open the government. She's going to send that over to Mitch McConnell. It'll be up to him whether he's going to present it to the Senate for a vote or not. But the point is that the Democrats will be able to show that they are acting to reopen the government, and that it is in fact Republicans who are blocking them and keeping the government from reopening, and therefore the Republicans and Donald Trump will own the shutdown. I think this is going to go on. This will probably prove out to be the longest shutdown in American history, which is 21 days. We're more than halfway. I think we're halfway there now. And it's just an impasse. And Lindsey Graham and the Republicans are trying to give Trump a way out by saying it's a metaphor. We're talking about border security here, but he keeps redoubling down on this idea of a concrete wall. And to put it in perspective, there is no wall in the southern border. There's 0 miles of wall. There's not one section of barrier which is wall. There's roughly about less than 800 miles of barrier. Half of that is vehicle protection, or so that vehicles can't cross. But you can literally walk right across it. So there's less than 400 miles of actual pedestrian barriers, and that is built in the easiest places. And all those barriers cost $7.1 billion to make. So where's Trump going to start to begin this $5 billion wall to cover the rest of the 1,250 miles that have virtually no barrier whatsoever? So I point all this out to just tell you it's just raw politics, and it bears no resemblance to reality of what's really happening here.
Yeah, but don't politics usually have some give or take? I mean, Jim Vandehei, I know it's just tweets, but I'm sensing, as Rick Tyler answers my question with a question, that there is, because there are no answers to Trump's thinking, but there is maybe a shift in dynamic between Speaker Pelosi and Donald Trump. You really see Trump in a different place. How does he save face?
Yeah, I think you're talking about him being backed into a corner. He really is. There's not an obvious solution. It really comes down to whether or not Nancy Pelosi and to some extent Chuck Schumer want to squeeze him. Because if they want to hold out, they've already defined it as sort of the Trump shutdown. If they say we're not going to give you any more money for the wall, there isn't really a way to save face. You have Lindsey Graham, who has this weird relationship, but mostly a close relationship with Trump, saying that there is a way out, which is you would basically trade more money for the wall. And he's saying the $5 billion that the president wants in exchange for additional protections for Dreamers and a resolution on DACA. If they could do that, that might be a way out. But it's not clear that Democrats would go for it, particularly in this environment, because they really do feel like they have their boot on Trump's throat. And why let him out if you don't need to let him out? Because what I think Trump is not reading correctly, especially if you look at these tweets, is he's assuming that the Democratic Party of today is the Democratic Party of 2006 or of 2010. I think the party's changed on immigration. I think the feeling that they have to appear to be really strong by supporting a lot more border security, that has waned, and that the enthusiasm of the Democratic Party is for protecting immigrants. And I think that's the miscalculation that he made, and he continues to make in those tweets.
Well, Susan Page, continuing with the boot metaphor, maybe trying to think of a different one, but they do have it. right now. They've got him cornered, and the question is, why in the world would they give him an out, given the way this president has behaved personally, given the way this president has led, given the way this president has behaved on the international front? It seems like he's such a runaway beer truck that there really isn't any relationship-building leverage they would want to create out of letting up on him.
And of course, this is a different Democratic Party. This is the first day of President Trump's next 2 years, which is an empowered Democratic Party with a position to have leverage they have not had previously in his presidency. And Jim Van Dyke just said it's not the same Democratic Party as 2006. It's not the same Democratic Party as 2018. This is a Democratic caucus in the House, particularly, that is more aggressive, more assertive, less willing to compromise, less trusting of Trump. I mean, the deal that, remember a year ago, they talked about a big deal on immigration that would include protection for the Dreamers along with money for a wall. That is not a deal Democrats would make today. It's not a deal that the Democratic caucus would back up. And it's not a deal that Nancy Pelosi would cut in this first test case of what her relationship is going to be with this White House.
Totally. And also, this is on a different level for Democrats completely, because for many, many months, they have been waiting for a voice with this president. They've been waiting to be able to hold him accountable on many levels. And now they have it. They don't want to squander it, but it is a different dynamic. And I'm not sure President Trump completely understands that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.